If England does make it to the final of the World Cup in New York on July the 19th, the Prime Minister would expect to be cheering them on, which, for the lifelong Everton fan Andy Burnham, is a bit of a bummer, because July the 19th looks like being the last day in office of the current Prime Minister. So that's what Keir Starmer meant by an orderly handover of power. 1-0 to the Arsenal. All the same, Burnham may not be in office, but he looks like a man in power already. But what's he going to do with it? No one knows yet. This time last week, Starmer was promising a fight to the death. This weekend, he's handing over the reins. And he's leaving his successor a £1 billion bonus, extra money for the defence of the realm. For the government this week, we'll be joined by Housing Secretary Steve Reid and his opposite number from the Conservatives, James Cleverly. Plus, with temperatures soaring across Europe, we'll speak to left-wing economist Thomas Piketty about his plans to make the world fairer and greener. Plus, with us throughout the show, author and columnist Lionel Shriver, political editor of The New Statesman, Alva Ray, and broadcaster Daisy McAndrew. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. 6 days ago, the Prime Minister stepped down, or perhaps more accurately, he jumped before he was pushed. Politics can be a brutal business. In last Monday morning's resignation speech, Sir Keir listed what he saw as his achievements: a crackdown on anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, falling immigration numbers, fewer small boat crossings, declining NHS waiting lists. You can argue about whether he had much to do with any of these things, but they did happen on his watch. The question he didn't address still hangs in the air unanswered. How did a man who won a landslide victory in 2024 become so disliked by so many people so quickly that even his own party's candidate in Makerfield promised to get rid of him? Well, I've known Starmer well both professionally and personally for almost 2 decades. We were, and soon will be again, I guess, near neighbours. Yes, he lacks the common touch, but I don't think there's anything so objectionable in his personality that it should inspire the visceral loathing expressed on so many doorsteps. He obviously made mistakes, the winter fuel debacle, for example, but so do most prime ministers. It may be unfair, but I think that what did for Starmer was simply that he made a promise to put country before party, and on every occasion he had the chance to keep his word, he broke it. The country wanted the 2-child cap on benefits. The party hated it. The country said it was time to cut welfare and boost defence. The party said that was unconscionable. The country cheered when a Pakistani Heritage Home Secretary said she'd demand more from migrants before they'd be allowed to settle permanently. Party activists called her un-British and racist. In each case, the Prime Minister chose the party, blamed someone else for his change of heart, ministers, advisors, civil servants, and threw them under the nearest bus. Andy Burnham will, in all likelihood, find himself both leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister in a few weeks. He too says he'll put country before party, and he talks like a man who means to take responsibility for his own actions. It won't take too long to find out if he really means it. Let's start this morning with the government. A little earlier, I spoke to Housing Secretary Steve Reid. Steve Reid, this time last week you were telling broadcasters no contest, nothing to see here. Do you now accept that Andy Burnham will be the next Prime Minister?
Well, the Prime Minister made a statement on Monday where he announced he will be standing down as Prime Minister and as leader of the Labour Party. Therefore, the Labour Party will elect a new leader who will become Prime Minister because of the majority that we command in Parliament. I think this is best done in as orderly and smooth a way as it can be. The vast majority of my colleagues, myself included, want Andy Burnham to take over as the new Prime Minister, and I expect that will happen in fairly short order now.
Should there be a general election, given that he'll be the 7th Prime Minister since John Major to come to office without giving the public a say in the matter?
Well, I think through all of this, and the reason it's so important it's done in an orderly way, is the public expect us to focus on delivering the change we were elected to deliver less than 2 years ago. The public do not want a general election. And that's not just my instinct. You can look at the polls that tell us the vast majority do not. They want us to get on with the job. Now, in our system, we don't elect a president, we elect MPs, and the MPs choose the Prime Minister. Keir Starmer stood down. There will be a new Prime Minister, very likely to be Andy Burnham, and we need to all get behind him and make sure we double down and deliver the change this country wants to see.
Does that imply that you think that whatever happened, let's assume Burnham becomes Prime Minister, that he is required to stick to the 2024 manifesto, fiscal rules, the decisions on nationalisation or not nationalisation, all of that?
Well, we were elected on a manifesto, and Andy has made clear he's committed to that manifesto as well. So, of course, there are going to be changes of emphasis and changes of approach within that. But when it comes to the fundamentals, Andy has been clear he will stick to the fiscal rules that have delivered this country stability in the economy for the first time in over 15 years. And that's important because it keeps people's mortgages as low as they can
and so
be
no
and
big
speeds
changes,
up investment.
So no big changes in policy, like, for example, abandoning the triple lock, which some of his advisers are said to want to do.
Well, there are conversations going on in Parliament all the time, but we're elected on a manifesto, and Andy is committed to that manifesto. Now, he'll want to change some things, and one of the areas he's talked about, and I think very excitingly, is devolution and handing more power directly to communities. Now, that is something that Andy and I have both been talking about for well over 10 years now. He did an exceptional job as the Mayor of Manchester. He's one of Labour's big success stories. It's one of the reasons he did so well in the Makerfield by-election, because people have seen the changes that he's made. Now, if we can push devolution further and faster, put more power into the regions of this country, we can see that kind of success in more parts of this country.
You can't have it both ways. You can't say he's got to stick to the manifesto and then say, let's push devolution, which, for example, would mean, for example, giving mayors tax-raising powers. That would be the next step without a general election. You've got to put it to the people.
It is in the manifesto that we're going to promote devolution, because we know, if you look at the country we inherited, it was being pulled apart by deep regional economic inequalities. Now, to challenge that, you've got to get power out of Whitehall and into the regions of this country, and even into the hands of people in their own communities. That is an agenda this government has been pursuing since the general election. Andy wants to put rocket boosters on it. That is entirely in line with our manifesto, and it's entirely in line with what many of us in the Labour Party have been talking about for a decade now. So I think you'll see changes of emphasis like that, but a commitment to the manifesto we were all elected on.
Well, I want to come back to that in a second, but let's just talk about the issue of today. On defence, can you confirm the reports that Andy Burnham has seen the defence investment plan and has signed off on it?
I have no idea about that, I'm afraid. I haven't spoken to Andy about the defence investment plan. What I can tell you is that since the general election, this government has increased spending on defence by more than any other government since the end of the Cold War. After we inherited from the Conservatives an army that was at its smallest size since the Napoleonic Wars, we committed to get investment in defence up to 2.5% of GDP over the lifetime of this Parliament. We have already gone beyond that after less than 2 years, and the Prime Minister will be making announcements through the Defence Investment Plan about billions of pounds further going into defence, because we recognise the threat this country faces. We recognise that the first duty of this government is to keep the country safe.
There are arguments about whether you have actually got to the level, but let's look at the broad picture. Here's what the former Chief of Defence Staff has written this morning about your defence policy. We are at the bottom of the table to meet our military commitments to NATO, propped up only by Iceland, hardly leading in Europe, and more NATO 31st than NATO first. Awkward. That is pretty scathing on your record.
That is talking about what we have inherited from the previous government.
He's talking about what you've done.
Defence spending was just 2.3%.
He says in the article, he's pretty clear.
They were cutting the army when we came in. Now, we committed...
No, he's pretty clear.
We committed in the general election to get spending up to 2.5% over this Parliament. We've exceeded that in less than 2 years, and the Prime Minister is about to announce billions of pounds further investments into
Radican points out that you're not going to get anywhere near the 3.5% that NATO wants, and that actually you have left a black hole, as it were, in the defence budget of about 14 billion, even to keep us to the place where we were before last year's defence review, the strategic defence review, recommended changes in the way we do things. So actually, you haven't got much to boast about, really.
Well, the biggest increase in defence spending since the Cold War is pretty good, and we're days away from the Prime Minister announcing billions of pounds more going into that. We are fully committed to the NATO-wide target by 2035, and we're working through the best way to spend that money. Now, what we're looking at is
the military chiefs are basically just whining.
Sorry?
The military chiefs are just whining. They basically say you haven't given them the money to keep the armed forces at the current standard.
It's absolutely right that the military should be making their case and pushing for the investment that they want to see. But I would just remind them and the country, the biggest increase in defence spending since the end of the Cold War is not a bad start, but we're not stopping at that. The Prime Minister is about to announce billions of pounds further investment in defence outside the spending review, which is an exceptional way to go about doing this, because we recognise the increased and changed nature of the threats facing this country, and because we accept the first duty of any government is to keep its country safe.
The increased and changed nature of the threat, it's also being said that the defence investment plan no longer contemplates as many, let's call them big, shiny weapons, ships, tanks and so on, and learning from what has happened in Ukraine, much more in drones, cyber and all of that. Is that true?
Well, we have to be ready for any future war and what that will be like, not whatever the last war was like. Now, the UK has been one of the staunchest allies of our friends in Ukraine as they have been battling against that brutal and illegal and unprovoked invasion by Vladimir Putin's Russia. But they're doing very, very well at the moment by changing the way that they are fighting and adapting it to modern warfare. Now, because the UK has been right in there with them, we have been doing that learning as well, and we need to bring that learning back to make sure that when that investment goes into defence in our country, it is of the kind that will keep us safe from any threats that we face in the future. And they are materially different from what they were just a few years ago.
Whatever the sum involved, somebody's going to have to pay for it. Andy Burnham's going to make his first big economic speech, we understand, early this week. And you've already talked about his big idea, devolution. One of the consequences of the devolution that he is talking about is moving public funding from the south to the north, or to be more specific, out of London, southeast, elsewhere in the country. Does it bother you that he wants London, region you're an MP for, which contributes almost twice as much per head to GDP as the northwest, 2.5 times as much as the northeast? He wants London to subsidise the rest of the nation.
First of all, that's not what he's saying. What Andy is saying is that this is one of the biggest economies on the planet, and yet we have some of the poorest regions in Europe in this country, and that is because of the grotesque regional economic inequality we have in this country. If we can invest in the infrastructure and support to allow our regions to grow, it actually helps the southeast of England because it stops our region pulling in so many people from other parts of the country because they've got...
I think he's going to shift resources, or he's not.
We're going to invest in all regions of the country so that the whole country can improve. It doesn't help London if London is the only place where people see opportunities for jobs and economic growth, because people from all over the country come to London. It pushes up our housing costs and pushes up housing demand. It benefits the South East if the rest of the country does well.
So actually, less public money goes into London.
No, that isn't what he's talking about at all. This is about if you devolve. Well, I know this from my own time.
There's not an infinite money tree. There's a certain amount of money you can spend.
You get better value for money from decisions that are taken close to the people that they are affected by. So you can drive value for money and productivity across the whole system by having more powers going
by investing in regions which are more productive. And London is twice as productive as the North West.
This government has always... We recently conducted the fair funding exercise for local government funding and reconnected funding with deprivation. That meant areas in the north and the other parts of the UK that have been denied their fair share of funding for years are now getting more of that funding. But it also meant areas of London that are poor and have been denied funding got their fair share too. This is about rebalancing the entire country and the entire economy so that everyone, everywhere benefits.
All right, just very quickly, is he going to propose nationalising the water industry? That would be popular.
What Andy's talked about is more public control over utilities, including water. Now, when I was the Environment Secretary, that is something we were looking at as well. I commissioned...
And would you favour it?
Well, it's what we're doing. I commissioned an external review because of the water companies were getting away with behaviours that were, frankly, completely unacceptable, failing to invest appropriately in water infrastructure. So we've brought in over £104 billion now of private sector investment to fix our broken water system, but with much greater oversight and control about what
I can see you're going in a direction, but I'm not quite clear. Are you in favour of bringing, for example, Thames Water into public ownership, under public control or not?
Well, if there is a default by Thames Water, they will be put into special administration, and the administrator would then look at what was the best thing to do with them before...
But you wouldn't do it... This would be because we've got to keep the taps open, rather than because you think it would be better to nationalise them.
We clearly need more public oversight over the water companies, and there's a discussion to be had about the best way to do that. I commissioned a review. There's a Water Act going through Parliament now, which is intended to increase public oversight and customer control over the water companies and much bigger sanctions for water companies that are letting their customers down, as they have done far too frequently in recent years.
All right, we're going to get a new immigration bill this week. The former Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner, described the Home Secretary's proposals to increase the length of time before migrants can apply for permanent settlement as un-British. As a Minister for Communities and Integration, do you agree with Rayner or Mahmood?
Well, I think the Home Secretary has brought forward proposals that will command the support of the vast majority of people in the country, let alone in my party. With the previous government, immigration went out of control. We had huge numbers of people coming into the country illegally because the Conservatives were not controlling the borders. Net migration today, with Shabana Mahmood as our Home Secretary, is 80% lower than it was when Robert Jenrick, then a Conservative, now in Reform, was at the Home Office.
So
that is a big
proposals
shift.
Are not un-British in your view?
No, keeping secure borders is part of what governments have to do. But we need to have safe and secure routes so that people who have a right to come to this country, to seek asylum or to seek refuge, can come here and be supported. So you don't do that by losing control of your borders in the way the Conservatives...
So just very quickly, is a yes or no. James Cleverly, who I spoke to a little earlier, has said that Mike Tapp should be sacked. Do you agree?
That's the same James Cleverly who sat in a government where we've now reduced net migration by 80%.
Should Mike Tapp
when
be
he
sacked?
was in here. I'm not going to comment on disciplinary issues affecting my colleagues. I don't know the detail of it. I have seen in the press that he apologised for a tweet that he made.
I just wanted to return to the Prime Minister. He will be gone in 3 weeks' time. First of all, let me just ask you, what do you make of the claim that Andy Burnham would be Labour's first woman Prime Minister? Because I'm quoting here from a senior Labour source. He is genuinely passionate about what this senior Labour colleague described as, quote, traditionally female-oriented issues and much less about bombs and budgets, which I assume they mean are boy jobs. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, it's a strange phrase, isn't it? Because Andy clearly is a man. But beyond that, it's quite right the Prime Minister should be focused on issues affecting women. That's over half of our country. We've got an epidemic in this country of violence against women and girls. Come on. There's a glass ceiling that affects women in many, many careers. Any government that cares about this country should be looking at how we support women to do that.
A senior colleague use the word, he will be our first woman Prime Minister?
It's a very strange phrase, isn't it? But he will be committed to supporting
Somebody's gone out of their
women.
mind,
Of course
right?
he will. Sorry?
Somebody's gone out of their mind.
It's a very strange phrase because Andy clearly is a man, but he's going to be focused on making sure that we open up opportunities to women and that we tackle the problem that we've got with violence against women and girls in this country because it's become an epidemic and there were insufficient sanctions against men who are getting away with abusing women.
May I just ask you very briefly, finally, one of the things that I think that we learnt from Makerfield, and we heard a lot of it on the doorstep, and I know you've heard it, the country seems to have really taken a dislike to Keir Starmer, over and beyond the impact of any policy mistakes he might have made or the whole issue of whether he's got the charisma or not. But you hear it on the doorsteps. People took a visceral dislike to him. What is that about?
Well, first of all, you get mixed views about Keir Starmer as you do about any other leader, but I recognise the point that you're making. Each of the last 4 prime ministers in turn has become the least popular prime minister ever. That says something about how people feel about this country, and that sentiment crystallises in the figure of the prime minister. But I think what's changing as well is social media, the level of abuse and hatred that we see targeted at all sorts of public figures, but particularly at the guy at the top. It really is quite shocking these days, and we need to be thinking much more about how we get more positive, hopeful and optimistic messages out to the country through that same social media channel. And that is something I think Andy Burnham did incredibly well, both while he was Mayor of Manchester and in the Makerfield by-election.
Steve Reed, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what our panel made of all that. We're joined all morning by author and columnist Lionel Shriver, the political editor of The New Statesman, Alva Ray, and broadcaster Daisy McAndrew. Alva, you're probably closer than all of us to what is going on inside the Labour High Command. Big question, big signal, who's going to be the Chancellor?
This is the big question. So as of a day or two ago, no decision had been made on this. I wonder if one will be made before tomorrow, because I can't imagine Andy Burnham won't face a lot of questions about this when he delivers his own speech on his economic plan. My understanding is that he has been inclined to appoint Ed Miliband, but some people around him haven't wanted him to, and that's why we've had quite an extraordinary few weeks with lots of other names being bandied around. Shabana Mahmood, Yvette Cooper, Pat McFadden, Wes Streeting, all sorts of names. But I think it's really an Ed or not Ed question. And so, I mean, from speaking to a lot of people on the Burnham camp, even though there are some people around Burnham who I think don't want him to make that move, I think that there's a general feeling that if you want someone who can get things done in the Treasury, who will meet the scale of Andy Burnham's ambition, who will work hand in glove with him, that it basically has to be Ed Miliband, that he's the only person. He is obviously not popular with people on the right, and you can see that all this outcry, this is what Andy Burnham will have to deal with if it is Ed Miliband. But I think there's a feeling in the Labour Party that overall he's the best fit. So my money, appropriately for the Treasury, my money would be on Ed Miliband.
It's interesting that it seems to be that the concern about that is people saying, what will the markets do? Will they hate the idea of this, what most people interpret as definitely on the left of the party? Is that going to create uncertainty? And then you've got the old, the tail wagging the dog. Does the Labour Party, does Andy Burnham care enough? Or does he want to
he should.
He should, but...
And he has been rightly mocked for expressing, not giving in to the markets. It's just like this is not.
This is a famous remark whether we should stop being in hoc to the markets.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which you are in hoc to the markets. I mean, you can't help it. It's not your choice. Any government would choose to not be in hoc to the market if that were an option. But it's just a fact. You need them.
And he has really been clear since that he accepts that and he would stick to the fiscal rules. On the advice of Ed Miliband, who has said you're going to need to be explicit about this. And so actually, there is a lot of scepticism, including within the Labour Party, about Ed Miliband, concerns about how markets would react. I think Ed Miliband's allies would say, but on what basis? Even in 2015, there was sort of language and a tone that a lot of people particularly on the right, didn't like, but it was a fiscally, constrained manifesto. There's nothing to suggest that he would want to borrow more.
But
really.
he has been such a fanatic as energy secretary that I think that that transfers to the economic sphere, even if that seems unfair. That is he's kind of a nut. And
we need to be a little careful here.
Okay.
I think
his passion, shall we say,
a zealot, as would be the word that some people might use.
Zealotry for net zero. The very term net zero, it has an absolutism in it, and I think that this is much like the whole thing with Starmer. I think is its texture, its personality. That's the concern.
But it's interesting.
Daisy, before you come in, I just want to ask you, because I've heard this spoken of through another lens, which is there are two ministers in the Starmer administration who people think were actually effective. Whether you agree with what they want to do or not, one is Miliband, the other one is Mahmoud.
Yeah.
Interestingly, they are completely opposite wings of the party. Miliband, if you look at the lists of who's popular in the party, Miliband, top, with the public less so. Shabana Mahmood, bottom with the party, public top.
Which tells you a lot about public opinion if you stop to think about it. And of course, this is one of the problems the Labour Party's got, because they know that. And they have got two very, very different constituencies. They've got an internal parliamentary constituency or an internal party membership constituency, which is very often at great odds to what the public opinion now is. And going to Lionel's point about environmental policies becoming a tinderbox when it comes to public opinion, which of course wasn't the case 10 years ago. And now it is. It's a very, very divisive case. And supporters of Miliband saying, well, he's one of the people within the cabinet or within politics who can get things done, who understands how Whitehall works, who could go to the Treasury and really bang heads together. And then other people saying, but is he whether or not he's effective, do we, is he of the right mind? Does he want the right thing to be effective about? Exactly. And and that's quite divisive. And then, of course, there is the old Ed Stone. People have long memories, particularly older generations who are voting, and think, so this new, fresh look Labour Party is actually full of old has-beens, and that is what a lot of people are concerned about. A load of Blairites coming in, a load of old names. Where's the fresh blood? Where's the fresh talent?
I think that's an interesting point. I mean, the thing is about Ed Miliband and Andy Burnham in their different ways. I think that they would both say that they are much better politicians than in Andy Burnham's case when he was in cabinet before, and in Ed Miliband's case than when he was Labour leader. I think that they have both grown, thought about what they want to do. Ed Miliband is really the only person in the Labour Party with a thought-through conception of political economy. Shabana Mahmood is seen as a really capable politician, but actually she's a bit of a black box in terms of what she would want to do with the economy. And so, I mean, this vibe, that he's seen as sort of a zealot, that he gets this a lot. There's not much factual basis for it in terms of on what actual grounds would markets worry that he wouldn't pay back.
I'm completely down with what you've just said, Alva, because I think people do improve with age. Lionel, just very quickly, on this woman question, I'm not quite sure what was meant by this idea of him being the first woman Prime Minister. There was a view that was expressed about Bill Clinton, that he was the first black president, but that was mainly to do with the way he was treated. What do you think the person who said this was trying to say?
I think it sounds as if someone was making an awkward compliment, but it didn't work. I mean, I don't want to diss my own sex, but generally saying that men are effeminate or are, it's a standard insult between men. You're a little girl, or you're acting like a woman. It's not a compliment.
I thought the other element of this was that the thing that women are concerned about are all sort of, nurseries and whatnot, but keep the girlies away from defence budgets.
Yeah, exactly. I care about the Iran war, thank you very much, and a great deal of other things that are not about makeup and nurseries.
I think this person has also inadvertently or advertently pointed out the fact that Labour has a woman problem, has never elected a female leader. And now they're saying, well, no, we have, because we're going to elect Andy Burnham, who's actually, a woman's woman. I mean, it was a ridiculous statement to come out with and just makes them look daft.
I think this is what was going on. Basically, the Labour Party ties itself into all sorts of embarrassing knots, trying to justify why it has never had a woman leader. I think Tim Shipman from The Spectator, who got this quote, probably just put that as a question.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't it a shame that, it's another leader, again, not a woman? And this person came up with this rather creative and embarrassing answer. But I think they just shouldn't bother. I mean, every single time, people have stood, people have tried. Lisa and Andy was on your show the last time I was on here saying, look, I've tried. And quite often the women who stand come bottom. And so, it's a bit of a thankless task even running for the leadership. But I think that the Labour Party shouldn't bother trying to justify it, and certainly shouldn't try to impose feminine characteristics on this quite blokey leader.
Try and gaslight us. He's a woman.
Well, we haven't even discussed Angela Rayner, but no doubt maybe we'll come back to her a bit later on. It is 9 o'clock. You are watching Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. In the last hour, Housing Secretary Steve Reed has told this programme that Andy Burnham will stick to Labour's manifesto and keep Rachel Reeves's fiscal rules. But he says he has no idea if Burnham has seen the Defence Investment Plan or signed it off. Well, there's a lot more to come this morning. Shortly, we'll hear from Sir James Cleverly. Plus, later in the hour, I'll speak to the French economist Thomas Piketty. Well, to the Conservatives now. Shadow Housing Secretary James Cleverly. I spoke to him just before we came on air. James Cleverly, you obviously would have preferred to have kept Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves in post, because it's obviously that you think you've got the beating of them. But now you've got Burnham. Who do you want as Chancellor?
Well, the names that are in the frame are all pretty disappointing. So we keep hearing about Ed Miliband being put forward as the potential Chancellor. I think that would be a disaster. I mean, frankly, I think the Burnham premiership is destined to be pretty bad. He's taking what appears, none of us know for sure, a very left-wing governmental agenda and taking it even further to the left. So if whoever he appoints is going to put that into practice from the Treasury, I think we're all in trouble.
So you're anticipating a change of direction. That would imply that you think that there probably ought to be a general election.
Well, look, if there is a general election, and it's not in our gift, that is
But presumably you want one.
Well, we want to get back into government. If we had to fight a general election, we could. We've got a very extensive association network. We've got candidates. We've got experienced councillors, people in business and the public sector that we know we could turn to form our next pool of candidates. But the fact of the matter is, Andy Burnham seems as if he's going to be given the keys to number 10 without any real competition. Whenever he has competed in the past, he's failed. So the fact he's cleared the field, I think, makes a lot of sense. But none of us know what we're getting.
It's, if I may say so, unusually, you're not really answering the question about whether you want a general election. And might that be because he gave you an absolute spanking in Makerfield? You didn't even clear 2%.
Well, and we gave the SNP and Reform and Labour an absolute spanking in Aberdeen South.
Yeah. But if the general election's in Scotland, fine.
So hang on, no.
Andy Burnham gave you a kicking.
You don't get to pick one by-election and say everything hinges on that and ignore another really important by-election. Because that by-election was on about the economy, it was about the union of the United Kingdom. It was a really important by-election. The Makerfield by-election was also very important. But the point is, Andy Burnham is not going to be the candidate in 650 parliamentary constituencies. And it's really easy to be popular when you haven't had to make any difficult decisions, like he hasn't.
But you're still not answering the question of principle here, really. Do you think that we should be changing prime ministers in this way, or should there be a general election? This is a matter of democracy.
So when there were calls for us to trigger a general election when we changed leaders, I'd never agreed with that. The point that I've always said, and I really felt this as Foreign Secretary, this churn of prime ministers and the instability of governments is not good for us on the world stage. There are some really important things. Defence spending, for example. Kemi's been clear That is an absolute priority. At this point in time, with the world as dangerous and turbulent, so we've got a plan to increase defence numbers, increase defence spending. We want to see the government do that rather than this appalling belly-button gazing exercise that we're going through at the moment.
On defence, we are hearing today that the government's going to put in an extra $1 billion compared to what it is thought they were going to give the military. And also it's going to be spent on rather different ways. More drones, to summarise it, more drones, fewer big ships. Do you think that's enough?
An extra $1 billion is a drop in the ocean. We know, because the Chief of the Defence Staff has told us, that UK Defence is facing something in the region of a £28 billion funding shortfall. £1 billion extra is not enough. John Healey, who I don't always agree with, but I've always respected, Al Carnes, again, who I don't always agree with, but I've always respected, resigned, both of them, because they said the gulf between what is needed and what the government is going to fund is too big, and this extra $1 billion is not going to cover that gap. And at a time when... Radek Sikorski, Polish foreign minister,
in Poland, yeah,
basically said that when you're spending something like 65 billion on defence and 360 billion on welfare, you are doing it wrong. And he's a good friend of the UK, and we should really listen when he says
So the Tories, if they were in government, would basically be raiding the welfare budget to pay for more guns, more tanks, more drones.
Well, you would say raiding it. I would say spending restraint, getting people back to work, spending money on defence, because if you don't have defence, you don't have anything. So whilst I wouldn't use your phraseology, yes, we would dramatically reduce the welfare bill, use some of it to reduce our deficit, and a big chunk of it to increase our armed forces, including, as we announced on Saturday, basically taking military reserve service pay out of tax for the vast majority of reservists, making sure that we've got a sovereign fund, a development fund for those emerging technologies like drones, like cyber, like autonomous.
And you would do this through restoring the two-child benefit cap?
That's right.
OK. Let's talk about one of your other old patches. Home Secretary plans to launch fresh immigration proposals, and one of them is to make the length of time before migrants can apply for permanent settlement longer. Angela Rayner called this un-British. Some people think it would remove the incentive for immigrants to integrate. What do you think?
Well, integration is a really important point. I don't think that extending the time for settled status would cause a failure of integration. I think one of the things that we have got to all recognise is that we can't just rely on a passive approach to integration. I think we need to be more proactive with regard to integration.
What does that mean?
Well, learning English, for example, is really important. There are still far too many women in immigrant communities who don't speak English, and they are vulnerable. And we've seen this play out. So things like learning English, having a better understanding of English history, that kind of stuff. So we should be proactive. I think the Home Secretary has done a lot of positive things, many of which she inherited from us and has kept, which is good. But what we're also seeing, as well as that announcement, both her and the Immigration Minister, for example, taking a big step to the left, clearly trying to ingratiate themselves with Andy Burnham, with the row that we're now having between the Home Secretary and one of our own ministers play out publicly, because they're desperately trying to ingratiate themselves with what they believe to be a new, very left-wing Prime Minister.
What is ingratiating? I assume you're referring to proposals where she suggests that we might adopt a Canadian proposal, a Canadian practice, I beg your pardon, in which groups of citizens, churches, universities and so on, can sponsor a refugee. What's so terrible and left-wing about that? Oh,
no, that's absolutely fine, but she could have announced that when she first became Home Secretary and didn't. The point is, she has
So just to be clear, you would support that as an approach to bringing and settling asylum seekers and refugees?
So when we were in government, we should remember that we had schemes like that for Ukraine, we had schemes like that for people coming from Hong Kong. So we're not inherently against a well-regulated refugee system, but what we do recognise is that a lot of people on the left think that if you have lots and lots of legal routes, that illegal migration will stop. And we know that not to be true. Last year, we saw small boat arrivals go through the roof. The government's had...
Yeah, they've come down, though.
They've come down, but let's see what the summer brings. And the fact of the matter is, they're also trying to sneak out an announcement. So in trying to present this as good news, they're trying to sneak out an announcement of a massive increase in former military bases being used as asylum accommodation camps. Now, yeah, and this is, if they were proud of this...
Why is this such a why is this such a mysterious thing? It's not new.
So, Trevor, you know this system. If they were proud of this, they would have made a statement at the dispatch box. They tried to sneak this out on a Friday when the House wasn't sitting in the hope that no one would notice. This is an admission of failure, and they know it.
When you were Home Secretary, your predecessor, Suella Braverman, had a few moments with her immigration minister, one Robert Jenrick, and you inherited him, and then he walked off the park and so on. If you were in this government's position, would you have sacked Mike Tapp?
Yeah, and I like Mike. I mean, I genuinely, I like him a lot. But that is a clear breach, in my mind, a clear breach of the ministerial code, a clear breach of collective responsibility. And the really interesting thing is this demonstrates a complete collapse of prime ministerial authority. Of the Home Secretary saying publicly she wants to sack a minister, which is then putting a question mark over Starmer's authority. So it's a big question mark about her behaviour. The Prime Minister then refusing to do so or failing to do so, or basically saying, actually, I'm out, I don't care anymore. I mean, this is the problem. We're now in this weird limbo where we don't have a proper Prime Minister. The King of the North is waiting in the wings. We have no idea at all what he's going to do.
OK, so speaking of the King of the North, it seems in modern times the best way to get to number 10 is to become a mayor somewhere. Would you be thinking about becoming mayor of London?
I knew you were going to ask me this.
I'm nothing if not obvious.
Well, the thing is, look, you and I both had that as our initial stomping grounds. Look, London is really important. Look, I'll give you the answer that I get. I've been asked this a lot. I'll give you exactly the same answer. I'm going to stay consistent, just as you are with your questioning. It is a really, really important job. The current mayor of London is asleep at the wheel. When London suffers, the country suffers, particularly the home counties, like my county of Essex. I have been asked to consider it. It would be a real wrench, a massive wrench, for me to step away from Braintree, because I absolutely love it. But what I'm not going to do is do what a lot of politicians do and say, oh, there is absolutely no chance, zero chance on earth. So I'm just being honest.
You're not going to... OK, so you're not going to say never. But actually, I think that's a perfectly fair answer. And frankly, the place where you and I started in London Assembly, it's a good platform. I mean, they don't all end up like me. David Lammy became Deputy Prime Minister, and maybe there will be a Prime Minister, cleverly.
Now, look, the next Conservative Prime Minister is going to be Kemi Badenoch. And I said during the leadership campaign that what the Conservative Party needed was a good-looking black leader from North Essex. I just should have been a little bit more specific.
James Cleverly, thank you for your time this morning. Got to hand it to him, haven't you? Anyway, back to our panel. Lionel, Alva and Daisy. On this issue of general election, I know I'm in danger of becoming a bore on it, but we've now had these other last 7 prime ministers essentially appointed by their parties. And I think the reason this is important is that political parties are not what they used to be. You know, 40 years ago, 5 million people or thereabouts belonged to political parties. Yeah. Now the Conservative Party has 120,000 members. Labour, less than 250,000. So actually, and let's be frank, people who join political parties these days are not I don't want to say not normal, but they're not typical. They're not typical.
All your viewers have just been so offended by what you say, because they're probably a higher number of your viewers who are political party members. But it is true, and obviously it's interesting that people like Simon Case and people like Alan Johnson have been saying that Andy Burnham should go to the country and should call a general election because of that mandate issue. And I was also reminded, one of your interviews there was talking about Andy Burnham, is there on a Labour manifesto. Well, is he actually? Because he didn't stand in the general election as a member of Parliament on that manifesto. He was busy running Manchester. So actually, is he there on that mandate? Now, if the answer to that is no, that actually could give him quite a lot of freedom to say, oh, yes, it's in the manifesto, but it wasn't my manifesto, if he's brave enough to do that. I mean, I was completely wrong a few months ago and thought that Keir Starmer would sack Rachel Reeves because she couldn't do the things that were necessary to do because she had stood on that. She had made all those promises about not doing that, and then, therefore, if he sacked her, he could get somebody new in who could say, well, that wasn't me who made those promises and things have changed and I can do it. So I was completely wrong about that. But I'm divided on the general election, and obviously no politician, no Prime Minister is going to call a general election that they think they're going to lose. So it's all going to be working out whether he can win it or not.
Lionel, what about democracy?
Yeah.
There's always an argument for that. This is, however, a parliamentary democracy. That is the system. This is possible. I think Americans always find that disconcerting, that you have a new Prime Minister and there was no election, like what? And I think that the feel of politics in the UK has become a little more presidential. This is clearly a decision that's going to be made on the basis of whether the unpopularity of the Labour Party right now is entirely due to Keir Starmer. And if you get rid of Starmer and you put in a fresh face, then the polls will completely flip. And I'm sure there will be some quiet research on that point.
Well, there's already been a little bit of a bounce for Burnham in the latest polls. But what do you think, Alva?
Well, so on that manifesto point that Daisy raised, I think Andy Burnham's already made it pretty clear that where there is a black and white commitment in the manifesto, he will not be breaking it. So on that, he's kind of covered, but he'll use that line that Steve Reid gave to you that, you're delivering on the change of the promise in the 2024 general election. And actually within that, a lot of things weren't gone into in much detail in that manifesto. So within that, you do have some wiggle room. On that bigger question of then whether you go to the country and seek a mandate, I think that probably he will have been considering it. But the difficult thing is there are lots of Labour MPs sitting on very small majorities who won't be thinking, who are very relieved that Andy Burnham is likely to be more popular than Keir Starmer. But the real question is, will he do better than Keir Starmer did in 2024? Actually, after that landslide, would you still end up losing some seats?
I don't want to stop you, Alva, but actually, let's have a look at where we are now, polls-wise. We on the show, we've always got a chart for everything. Here's the polar coaster. And if you were the Labour leader right now, that doesn't quite look like the place where you're going to go, woof.
But the thing is, because he isn't even through the door of number 10 yet. I'm sure that will shoot up. And the thing is, he will never really be as popular as he will be in his first few months as leader. So in terms of maximising their chances of doing well, going sooner makes sense. But for all these Labour MPs who still might lose their seats around the edges in these tiny majorities, why would you want to cut your time as an MP short by several years? I think you'd feel a little bit like a turkey who had voted for Christmas. You had this new leader in and then suddenly you were out of a job. And I think that there's an effort to reassure Labour MPs around that at the moment, and that actually might force Andy Burnham to hold off. But I think it's a real strategic question. Do you wait but do worse in a few years' time?
There's one other point here. He's, of course, got the same problem that Keir Starmer has, which is huge party in the Parliament, i.e. a lot of people to corral and herd. And we're already seeing, frankly, some issues to do with discipline, the Mike Tapp question. The junior immigration minister goes out on his freelancing, writes a piece in the newspaper saying, this is what I think should happen. His boss says, Shabana Mahmood says to Number 10, sack him, because he didn't ask me. Number 10 says, oh, no, discipline is breaking down, isn't it, Daisy?
I don't really think so. I have sympathy with the fact that this is a lame duck government, and I hate the constant churn of ministers. And I think you could equally argue that if they did have some sort of mini reshuffle, because you can't just normally take one in, put one in, and then just a few weeks later, a few days later, you're having another whole reshuffle. I mean, what is the point? What a total waste of time, and you'd only be doing it for show. So I'm weirdly sympathetic to the fact that they thought, oh God, let sleeping dogs lie. And this is Andy Burnham's problem. This is his government now, probably.
Well, Alva, what actually happened there? Is it true that Shabana Mahmood wanted him sacked?
Yeah, I think so, and I think that probably some people close to Starmer thought that was a bit rich coming from her. Given that she had, it's well known that she called on Starmer to resign, that he has not enjoyed her support, but she has stayed in his cabinet. Yeah. I think then saying, "Oh, can we sack this person for disloyalty, please?" I think felt a bit rich, and so. It's sort of been a bit comical all round. I mean, Mike Tapp did a quite ridiculous tweet, which he then had to delete and apologise for. And, then Keir Starmer has been
This is a tweet that mentioned the Taliban.
Tweet mentioning
the Taliban. In the same sentence as a Muslim
and I don't think,
secretary.
I don't think you should be comparing your parliamentary colleagues in the Labour Party to the Taliban, really.
Do you think?
Right in there with calling your Prime Minister in waiting a girl.
What do you think, Lionel? Andy Burnham, what's your feeling? That this is going to be a period of calm, normality, or do you think this is not going to change much?
It's going to seem exciting at first, and then it's going to be same as usual. I don't think Burnham is going to change policies that much. Obviously, if anything, a little more to the left, which is going to make the most obvious problems in this country worse. The welfare bill is out of control. The interest payments are enormous and only going one direction.
Okay.
The budgetary problem looms large, whoever is PM.
OK. We'll see if we've got a solution with our next guest. I'll speak to the French economist, Thomas Piketty.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They will be allowed to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... Hi, darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood has rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan. I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Now, it's hot here, but it's even hotter in France. Records tumbled and temperatures soared to more than 40 degrees in many parts of the country. Scientists say that the extreme heat we've seen right across Europe is a sign of things to come. Now, I can now speak to the left-wing French economist Thomas Piketty, who is live in a very hot Paris, I gather.
Yeah, well, yesterday night we had rain and now it's better.
OK, good. Your Global Justice Report contains some pretty radical claims. For example, that for 9 out of 10 people across the globe, your plan can reduce working hours by half, yet double their incomes to around 5,000 euros each month, which is a standard of living currently achieved by just 13 out of 189 countries surveyed by the IMF. Now, this sounds fantastic, but how do we get from here to there?
Well, to some extent, this is already what we have achieved in the past. So, the reduction in working hours is really in the continuation of what happened in the past. So the number of hours per worker was about 3,000 hours per year in 1900. And today it's 2,000 hours on average at the world level and 1,500 in Europe. And so our target of 1,000 hours by 2100 is actually a smaller decline than what we already had over the past century in Europe. And as you know, real wages were multiplied by 10. So in fact, if anything, our projection, our target for 2100 are less ambitious than what happened already in the past. Now, the one big difference, of course, is how do we make energy and how do we make this growth performance happen without, boiling together on the planet. So this is the question we're asking. And of course, this 5,000 euro in gross national income per capita per month that we have as a target for the world in 2100 cannot be the same 5,000 euro that you have approximately in the United States today. So first you have to make energy differently, that's for sure. So fossil fuel have to go away. You have to invest in renewable energy, solar panel, wind turbines. These are enormous investments. So, at the level of the world, because again, Europe and the US, cannot ignore the fact that the rest of the world, has an aspiration to prosperity that is legitimate. And if we don't organize together a plan where they reach prosperity, but without the fossil fuel extraction and carbon emissions that we created to become rich,
I want to come to
way.
I want to come to the rest of the world in a second, but just let's deal with the sort of general proposition that you're making that working time can be halved, incomes can be doubled, and wage inequalities can be compressed, and all of that. Now, the thing is, though, history doesn't go in a straight line, does it? What tends to happen is that there are major events, and you refer to energy, I think, correctly, the invention of the steam engine, electrification. Now, you can't assume that something like that is just going to happen and will get us from a place where, 170 countries, the average wage is below 4,000 or 5,000 euros, and suddenly, bang, everything's going to get us to 5,000.
Yeah, again, the increase in wage in the past century, in Britain or France was a tenfold factor. So we have to refer to this past experience, before saying that it's impossible. But you are right that the context is different, in particular because we have this enormous investment needs in, climate infrastructure, low carbon energy infrastructure, and also in education and health, so that countries, like in South Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, have the opportunity to catch up at the same time without producing a boiling planet. Because, again, we tend to forget in rich countries that, sometime in our projection, in our climate projection, we sort of assume that poor countries are going to remain poor. Even in the most cooperative a scenario studied by IPCC in IPCC report, Africa is supposed to be at 1/3 of per capita GDP of Europe, even in 2100. But people in India or in Africa are simply not going to accept to remain poorer than us forever, and they have no reason to accept that, in particular because they have this climate damage which are today a reality, and so. Anyway, we have to find a plan, and we are not saying in this global justice report. Let me say that this is first the toolbox, so that everybody also can design your own scenario. So we give online all the computer file, all the data series, the data explorer, globaljusticeproject.wik.world, where you can.
Can I ask you about the politics?
Scenario? Yeah, please.
Let me ask you about the politics of this, and just take one example. You propose that something like 10% of global income go to supporting poor nations through an international mechanism. Do you really think that there's much chance of getting there when the contribution of 0.7% of GDP, which most rich nations are supposed to put into international development, is hardly reached in most big countries, and we're having an argument here about 0.3%. Never mind getting anywhere near 10%. How does that work politically?
Yeah. So first, this 10% of world GDP for the Global Justice Fund is not just for poor countries. It's for all of us. It goes every country, including Britain, which, from what I understand, has budgetary problems right now, or including France, is receiving money from this fund. So this is, a global fund where collectively we ask more to billionaires, centimillionaires, higher income taxpayer, and every country benefits from country dividends on an equal per capita basis. So now this equal per capita basis is more important if you start poor than if you start rich. But, in terms of fulfilling basic needs in education, in health, in energy infrastructure, every country benefits. Now, what you were referring as transfer from north to south are a lot smaller than 10% of GDP. It's of the order of 1-2% of GDP, and it's actually 3 times smaller than the damages caused by the brought by the carbon emissions of rich countries in the past. So these are not transfers. This is just a very partial reparation for damages that are made. Now you can decide. We can decide that we don't care. But the problem is that, then the future that you have in mind is a future where we are boiling first, where you have countries that are so poor that, what do? You put millions of drones in the Mediterranean to prevent them from coming. This is a kind of future which is so dystopian that, you have to think of something else.
Let me ask you one last question. Of course, it's World Cup time, and some of us are obsessed by football. But one of the things that struck me was that you addressed the issue of inequality within nations as well as between nations. And one of your proposals is essentially to, I know it's a little bit more complicated than this, but essentially to reduce the ratio between high incomes and low incomes to about 1 to 5. Now, I had thoughts about this. It means that even if you doubled the lowest incomes, that would mean that the highest incomes were around 25,000 euros a month. And that's what Kylian Mbappe earns in a day and Harry Kane earns in a day and a half. How are you going to make them accept 25,000 euros when actually Mbappe is taking home 30 million a year?
Yeah, but they don't know what to do with this money. This. I'm trying. Look, let's be very concrete. If you look 100 years ago in countries like in Nordic Europe, for instance, the income gap was 1 to 150. Over the course of the 20th century, it has been reduced to 1 to 11. And here I am referring very precisely to the ratio between the top 0.1% and the bottom 10. So it's not quite Kylian Mbappe, but it's really the very top. So it was reduced, the gap, the income scale, 1 to 150 to 1 to 11. So when we're saying we're going to 1 to 5, it's in the continuation of a long-run evolution. And, if 100 years ago, people had told, in Sweden or in Germany, okay, you're going to reduce by 10 the income scale, everybody at the time, conservative economists, commentators would have said, okay, this is communism, the world is going to collapse, the economy is going to fall. But in fact, there was an unprecedented rise in prosperity, more than ever before. So I am not impressed, by people who know in advance the fact that it's impossible to compress inequality. Because again, history shows us that, you need actually a very inclusive economic system and social system to grow. The time of colonial growth is over. We need all young people going to university, accessing to high human capital, to high health services, education services, and that's what's producing equality and at the same time prosperity. And the idea that just a few geniuses in the world are going to solve the problem for us by colonizing the Mars planet and putting data centers all around the world is just crazy. It's not working at all. It's not going to deliver, not in the income front, not on the environmental front.
Thomas, I could talk to you all morning about this, and I'd love to talk to Kylian Mbappe about how he could spend his money. I've got some really great ideas. But anyway, thank you so much, Thomas Piketty, The Economist. In just a moment, we're going to hear once again from our panel.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News. People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood is rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan. Been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
OK, back to our panel. Lionel, Alva and Daisy. Lionel, what did you make of Thomas Piketty?
Pie in the sky, or, you know, croissant in the sky. It sounds a little scary to me because these big economic projects that are top-down usually go wrong. Economies do better when they evolve organically. And the kind of prosperity that he is touting from the last 100 years did not happen because someone on high or someone who writes big fat books determined that this is the way it's going to be, and then we're going to make it so everyone is much richer by doing this. And so the ratio has to be the poorest 1 and the richest 1 to 5. That's never going to fly.
He was ticking me off a bit, though, and I suppose in a fair way to say that 100 years ago, somebody like me might have gone, the idea of women being equal, come on. And here we are.
Yeah, but at the same time, this idea of basically putting a huge ceiling on how much money you can make, period, it ignores the Laffer curve, you know? It means that you're going to have far less invention, creativity, ambition in your people because you're sitting on them.
Yeah, the Laffer curve being that curve that describes the relationship between how much tax people get paid and pay and...
Yeah, there's a point at which the more you tax people, the less money you
they
get.
find ways of not...
They either get out of it or they won't do the work.
What did you think, Daisy?
I appreciate him and people like him being able to have big ideas and throw them out there. And certainly he is speaking an absolute truism that the difference now between the top of the tree and the bottom of the tree is huge, and the concentration of wealth between certainly certain companies now. If you look at the richest companies in the world and the richest firms in the world, it is an extraordinary state of affairs that we've got multiple companies that have incomes vastly exceeding the GDPs of many, many countries. Now, I'm not somebody who necessarily says, therefore, we must do what he's prescribing we must do, but it is true, and it does feed into our day-to-day politics. Pretty much everything we talk about nowadays, the division, the tribalism, all of these things, a lot of these things you can pinpoint back to some sort of inequality.
I love Thomas Piketty. I think he's super interesting. And this is basically the opposite of what we have in British politics most of the time, where he steps back and talks about, long-term trajectories and big ideas, even if a lot of people don't think that they would work or don't like them. I mean, on so many things, he's right. Like, we are on a trajectory where we are working less for more money. Like, that is, if you look at the span across the centuries, if you think about AI and so on, that is where we are headed. And we don't really talk about that. And even, talking about that Global Development Fund seems unlikely to happen. But actually, here in the UK, we're so myopic, so insular. We talk about wanting to stop the boats and don't really talk about global migration flows or how difficult they are to stop or what is causing those, with like the climate emergency, but huge parts of the world affected by war, famine. That's only going to get worse. And we just don't really talk about those things and how the case for trying to manage that at source, rather than just thinking that you can trying to do something right at the border of the UK. So I thought he was pretty interesting.
Well, we haven't talked... the one outfit we haven't talked about today is Reform, and of course they have a pretty robust view about immigration. What do you think Makerfield meant for them, Daisy?
I think it's a fascinating time for them because, again, you were just showing that graph and showing...
Yeah, we can put up the poll coaster again.
On paper, they're still doing very well. Yes, they've had that disappointment in Makerfield, but I think it's also really interesting that the pickle that Farage has got himself into with this loan. Normally, that wouldn't have been... I mean, yes, it's huge. You're talking about £5 million, so it's a lot bigger than other donations we've seen. But normally, those sorts of issues wouldn't really touch him. They just sort of slid off him because people were more interested in his leadership, his charisma, his popularity and so on. But this one does seem to be breaking through. And I think that is something. And it's clear that those around him seem to be circling and thinking, is there life after Nigel?
Well, let's see if there'll be life after this break. In just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Liberation Day.
By popular demand, here we are.
Donald Trump. It is quite the story. Wherever it goes, on Trump 100, we go with it.
Can you tell us who you're looking for?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
Are you overstating the reach and significance of this deal?
Not like you said it.
From the UK.
Why don't you go back to your country where you have a major migrant problem?
It was 10 feet from him, and all of a sudden the shot's running out.
People impacted.
I'll tell you on another day on the podcast what that was all about.
Join us wherever you get your podcast.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight?
Off the scale. I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
Okay, there's a lot of firing going on.
Can you explain to me why? We're journalists, eh?
Let's go. Watch, wait, right, we're going to get in. Right, get in. Get in.
We just want to ask you a few questions about your involvement with ISIS. Next step for them, quite often, is getting on a boat and sailing illegally over into Europe.
Es un solo procesamiento, una sola sacada.
Whoa. Oh my goodness. Whoa. Oh my goodness.
If you weren't affected, you'd be a bit of a strange person.
Turn off the camera. Turn around and go away.
Okay, but
listen, I told you 3 times.
They saw two guys, two bad people.
There's an absolutely packed dinghy.
that is what it's like. Sometimes you have to put in an awful lot of hard work. It's worth doing. I suppose it is what we do.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect.
Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking,
Thank you so much.
trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching.
Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be all out to war.
I'm just going to put some body armor on. I'm Yalda Hakim.
Back to our panel, Lionel, Alva and Daisy. Now, one thing we haven't talked about at all today is foreign affairs, but next Saturday, July the 4th, the 250th anniversary of what I personally regard as probably the single most important political event of the last 300 years. Either the independence of America or the departure of the bandit colonies from from Britain. What should we learn from that, do you think, Lionel?
From the fact that it's not being made a big deal of over here?
Well, maybe that's one question. but you know, it's such a huge event. What do you think it tells us about?
Well, the real event is the fact that not just the country was established, but it has been sustained for 250 years. And that is an achievement. It's the American project has fundamentally succeeded, and for longer than I suspect its founders ever imagined possible. So that is the event. It is a 250-year event. And I've tried to rev up a little bit of enthusiasm. I'm not a natural jingoist. I'm not really that patriotic. That doesn't make me special anymore. But I do still feel American, though I have spent most of my adult life outside the country, which I find rather extraordinary. Sure. So that it's a pretty deep feeling.
Many people would say that the real big point is that America set an example. The Constitution, all men created equal, First Amendment rights, and all of that, and that's really been its significance. It set a pattern that the world follows, and even today, for example, if you survey immigrants, Pew do this quite regularly, the place they want to go is the United States.
Yes.
It is the most admired policy in the world.
And it's a place where people think that regardless of all the political turmoil we've gone through recently, it's orderly, so there's rule of law. It is a place where you can be ambitious and possibly succeed. There are no guarantees, but there is no ceiling. Thomas Piketty's ceiling, sky's the limit, really. And that reputation is deserved. It's still a pretty decent place to live.
There's a feeling, though, that perhaps we have come too close to the United States, that actually we're not quite a colony, but we depend too much on. Do you think that this new administration here is going to change our posture at all, Alva?
Ooh, good question. I think it'll be interesting to see in terms of tone what Andy Burnham is like with Donald Trump. I mean, I think, that'll be fascinating to observe. I think in substance, very little should change in terms of that relationship. I think that Keir Starmer's approach with the US and just wider geopolitics is seen to have broadly been a success. I think a lot of people around Keir Starmer feel like he might have done a better job had he not had such a tricky customer in the White House, but that he has played the best hand. He's done the best he could with the hand he was dealt. Interestingly, The Observer had an interesting story on Friday that Jonathan Powell, the most important foreign affairs advisor inside Number 10, National Security Advisor, he's going to stay on under Andy Burnham, which I think will be a huge relief to the Burnham team. And that absolutely was not guaranteed. I mean,
no, he was meant to be going in the autumn, wasn't he? That was the understanding. And of course, there are also stories that Starmer might be angling to be our ambassador to the United States. Now, personally, I cannot see how that could possibly work, and it's kind of a crazy story, particularly after the Mandelson fiasco. That would seem really daft. But it does, and also, of course, we haven't talked about the Foreign Secretary, whether David Miliband could be there. Our relationship with the United States is, of course, absolutely critical. And I think we understand that we're very much the junior party. And it does mean that if we think about 250 years ago of how much has changed and how insignificant. But on your point of being surprised that people aren't here, more revved about it or more excited. I think it's just because most people can't almost grasp, get it into their heads how that 250 years ago this seismic thing happened. We are so used to America being so huge, being so important, that I think, apart from watching Hamilton, most of us can't really get through it.
Have these people not watched Hamilton?
Yeah, but there is the other obvious side of it that the current resident of the White House dampens people's enthusiasm for celebrating the United States, and I'm afraid that domestically as well, there is very little palpable sense of celebration, especially among Democrats, and that is, half the country. So so all the stories are the reflecting pool fiasco and the destruction of the East Wing of the White House and the cage fighting.
Yeah.
And it's a little crass. It's not even a little crass. It's crass. The feeling is that the trappings of that celebration are out of control and a little embarrassing.
Well, if you're out partying next Saturday, have a good time. I'll be back next Sunday, 8:30 in the morning.